Jesus' baptism raises several questions. Most sermons I've heard on this story focus on the question of why. Why was Jesus baptized? It's a good question. If Jesus really was sinless, as we claim that he was, why did he need to be baptized in the first place? Over the centuries, some really compelling theological answers have bubbled to the surface. Some think that Jesus' baptism served as an example for the rest of us. Others suggest that when Christ's divinity touched those waters, they were infused with holiness, so that in our own baptism, through those same waters, we might be made holy. Both good answers. But as important as all of that is, I believe even more important than the question why is the question when. When was Jesus baptized? Not when as in a specific year, but when in relation to the rest of his life. When in relation to the rest of the gospel story. When might sound like a relatively simple question, but rarely do we read the gospels from beginning to end. For example, every Sunday we gather here in church and we read them as part of the lectionary, this 3-year cycle of assigned readings. And as much as I love the lectionary isn't chronological. It jumps around all over the place. So one week we might read about Jesus' crucifixion, and the very next week we might read about his birth. So there's always this danger of forgetting where we are in the bigger story. And I worry that that's what's happened with Jesus' baptism. I worry that when we read this passage in church year after year after year, disconnected from the rest of the gospel, we forget where we are in the story. When does it take place within Jesus' life? When does it take place within Matthew's gospel? Is it the beginning? Is it the middle? Or is it the end? Several years ago, I sat with a man who knew that he was about to die. Many, if not most, people have no idea what to do or say in this situation. But luckily, this is one of the things that they actually do teach you in seminary. While our natural instinct might be to just keep pretending like death doesn't exist, more often than not, the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is address the elephant in the room. How are you feeling about death? I asked the man. Tears came to his eyes and started cascading down his cheeks. Blake, he said, I haven't done enough. What do you mean you haven't done enough? I asked. There's just so much more I wanted to do, he said, for my church, for my family, for my friends. I just haven't done enough. I haven't done enough, he repeated over and over again. This man had been in church the majority of his decently long life. And I can guarantee you that he had heard the story of Jesus' baptism. I can guarantee you that he had heard countless sermons about that baptism. I can guarantee you that he knew that when Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens opened. He knew that the Spirit of God descended like a dove, and he knew that a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." But as many times as he had heard that story, as many sermons as he had heard about that story, I don't think he had ever been told when that story took place in Matthew's gospel. Because from his comment, it was clear to me that he thought this story happened somewhere near the end, not the beginning. I haven't done enough. That comment only makes sense if Jesus was baptized at the end of the gospel. That comment only makes sense if he was baptized after he'd preached the Sermon on the Mount, and after he'd healed crowds of people, and after he'd cast out demons and calmed storms and fed thousands, because at the end of the gospel, of course God would say, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Unlike this dying man, clearly Jesus had done more than enough. I wonder, how many of you have lived your entire life assuming Jesus was baptized at the end of the gospel? How many of you have lived your entire life trying to do enough, to be enough? How many of you have lived your entire life longing, striving, doing everything in your power just to hear those words? This is my child, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. But here's the thing. This story doesn't happen at the end of the gospel, but at the very beginning. Matthew chapter 3, to be specific. In chapter 1, Jesus was born. In chapter 2, the wise men came and the Holy Family traveled to and from Egypt. But that's all that's happened so far. As far as we know, Jesus hasn't done anything. At least not anything worth writing about. At this point, he's just a single guy in his 30s living at home. As far as we know, he hasn't preached a single sermon. He hasn't healed a single person, cast out a single demon, calmed a single storm, or fed a single person. And yet, just as he came up from the water, a voice from heaven said, "This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." That's the beauty of baptizing children. Today, Robert, Audrey, Harold, Francis, Charles, and Catherine will all be baptized. And as cute as they are, they haven't done anything. They haven't gotten an A on a test or won any championships or trophies or medals. They haven't graduated from college or high school or even kindergarten. They have 0 volunteer hours and have never been promoted. They haven't gotten married or had kids or bought a house. And yet, God says the exact same words at their baptism that he said at Jesus's. "This is my child, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." But adult baptism is just as beautiful. Because in adult baptism, no matter what you have or haven't done, God still says those same exact words. You see, for Jesus, his belovedness and God's pleasure in him wasn't the result of a life well lived, but its precondition. Jesus could have never done the things he did had he not been told from the very beginning who he was. "This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." As I tried to communicate to that dying man years ago, whether you die today or 10 years from now, chances are you'll never feel like you've done enough. But it turns out that doesn't really matter. Because in baptism, God has said, you are enough. You are enough. This is my child, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Amen.